The office of a large corporation in New York was always filled with noise, telephones ringing, reports being printed, workers constantly moving. Alice, a 35-year-old manager, has long been accustomed to this rhythm. She had worked here for 10 years and was proud of her career. However, lately it seemed to her that something important in her life was being lost. Marriage with Jack, her husband, was based on everyday life and routine. Jack was a construction worker, often working overtime on large projects. Their life together followed a schedule, mornings filled with meeting for work, evenings when they hardly spoke due to fatigue. The only joy remained their 7-year-old son, for whose sake Alice and Jack kept the appearance of a perfect family. One day, the office was surrounded by rumors about the newly appointed manager. Everyone discussed with interest the new figure in the company. Thomas appeared unexpectedly, tall, confident, with a penetrating look. His first greeting to the team was professional yet charismatic. He immediately won the attention of the workers, and his calm, persuasive voice commanded respect. Alice noticed how his gaze lingered on her longer than on the others. She decided that it was just a professional gesture because she was used to the formal atmosphere of the office. However, after a few days, Thomas began to pay more attention to her than to other employees. For the first few days, Thomas behaved discreetly, observing the work of the team. But soon he became interested in Alice's work. He praised her professionalism and emphasized the importance of her contribution to the projects. Thomas would often come over to her desk, discuss the details of assignments, and sometimes linger for longer conversations than necessary. Alice felt a little confused. She did not understand why she became the object of his attention. One day, after a long meeting, Thomas invited her to stay for a few minutes. In his office, he said, "You are very talented, Alice. I can see how invested you are in your work. I am very glad to have such a professional in my team." These words touched Alice. She hadn't heard compliments in marriage for a long time, and Thomas's attention seemed pleasant to her. She convinced herself that it was just a professional interest. However, somewhere deep in her soul, she felt that this conversation meant more to her than she wanted to admit. After the conversation in Thomas's office, Alice felt unusual. His words continued to play in her head, causing mixed feelings. On the one hand, it was just professional encouragement, but on the other, something in his tone, the way he looked at her, made her think. A few days later, Thomas unexpectedly invited her to dinner, explaining that he wanted to discuss an upcoming project. Alice hesitated, but agreed, as it seemed part of the job. They met in a cozy restaurant near the office. Thomas was friendly and easy to communicate with, skillfully switching the conversation from work issues to personal topics. "How do you manage everything?" he asked when their meals were served. "Family, work, all this takes so much time. Honestly, sometimes I don't even know," sighed Alice, "but I try to keep a balance." "You look like you have everything under control," he said with a small smile. Alice was a little embarrassed, but at the same time she felt her heart start to beat faster. The conversation dragged on and they laughed more than she expected. It was the first dinner in a long time when she felt needed and interesting. Alice returned home late. Jack met her with a short question. "Why so long?" "Work," she replied, trying to keep her tone casual. Jack ignored it, but Alice felt a slight pang of guilt. She tried to convince herself that it was a normal business dinner, but the memory of how Thomas was looking at her made her uneasy. The next day at the office, Thomas was as reserved as ever. But there was an elusive spark in his eyes that made Alice feel that there was more to them than just work. At the same time, she noticed that some colleagues became interested in their frequent conversations. Gossip in the office always spread quickly, and Alice didn't want to be the center of attention. She decided to limit her communication with Thomas, but every time he approached her desk, her resolve weakened. Late evening, the office floor was almost empty except for a few workers who were still lingering. Thomas approached Alice as she was about to leave. His voice sounded confident, but a little warmer than usual. "Alice, I know it's late, but we need to get these papers sorted for tomorrow's presentation. Can you stay for another hour?" Alice thought for a moment. Home was waiting for her, but she agreed. "Of course, Thomas." "I'll help," she replied, putting her bag down. Thomas smiled, his eyes lingering on her longer than necessary. They worked side by side, analyzing the documents, discussing the details of the presentation. The light of the lamps created a soft glow that added an unusual intimacy to the evening. When they were done with the last document, Thomas leaned back in his chair and sighed deeply. "You're incredible, Alice," he said, looking at her. "I couldn't have done it without your help." Alice smiled, slightly embarrassed by his directness. "That's my job, Thomas, but thank you." He leaned forward, looking her straight in the eyes. "This is not just a job. You have something special." Alice felt her heart begin to beat faster. She wanted to say something, but the words stuck in her throat. Thomas got up from his chair and slowly walked over to her. His gaze was so penetrating that she could not tear her eyes away. "We both feel it, don't we?" he said quietly. Alice didn't answer, but her silence said more than any words. Thomas leaned closer and she didn't back down. Their lips touched, and the world seemed to stop. They forgot about the office, about their duties, about all moral barriers. All that existed at that moment was the passion that had been building up between them for a long time. On the table among scattered papers and graphs, they surrendered to their feelings. The light of the lamp illuminated their faces, and the silence of the office seemed unusually deep. That night was the moment that changed their lives forever. For Thomas, it was playing with fire. For Alice, a move she would later call her biggest mistake. Alice had mixed feelings after their night together. She knew what happened was wrong. She violated the boundaries that could not be violated. But at the same time, she could not forget how Thomas looked at her, how his arms hugged her. Thomas, on the contrary, seemed calm and confident. The next day, he acted as if nothing had happened, but there was a hidden spark in his eyes that spoke louder than words. Alice realized that this relationship with Thomas began to drag her into a vortex from which it would be difficult to get out. Several weeks passed. Alice began to stay late at work more and more often, explaining it with new projects. Jack began to notice changes in her behavior. She became more withdrawn, spent more time on the phone, and avoided questions about work. One evening, when she went to take a shower, Jack noticed her phone on the table. He had never checked her personal belongings before, but this time, something made him pick up the phone. He knew the password, and after unlocking the phone, he saw several messages from Thomas. The texts were short but warm. "I'm looking forward to our next meeting." "You look great today." Jack felt his heart sink. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but doubts had already taken root in his thoughts. That evening, Jack decided to talk to Alice. She was just out of her mind when he asked her a direct question. "Who is Thomas?" Alice froze in place. She tried to think of an answer, but a wave of panic made her voice uneven. "Thomas? This is my manager. Why do you ask?" "Just a manager?" Jack looked at her suspiciously. "Then why is he texting you?" Alice felt her marriage begin to crack at the seams. She realized that Thomas became not only a source of admiration, but also a reason that could destroy her whole life. Alice tried to remain calm, although she felt that she had been exposed. She lied. "Thomas is just a good leader, and we sometimes discuss projects. Nothing personal, I assure you." Jack couldn't believe it. He had known her long enough to know the difference between truth and lies. However, he decided not to push further, now. His plan was simple: observe, gather evidence to find out the whole truth. Over the next few days, he became more attentive to detail. He noticed Alice coming home later than she promised, and how she smiled as she read messages on her phone. His suspicion only grew. One day, Alice and Thomas decided to have lunch together in a small cafe away from the office to avoid prying eyes. They sat in a separate booth, talking about work, but gradually the conversation turned to more personal topics. "I love you, I think about us all the time," said Thomas, looking straight into her eyes. "I think you deserve much more than you get." Alice, hearing these words, felt a wave of warmth. She hadn't heard such words in a long time, and every compliment from Thomas pushed her further into the unknown. Their conversation was interrupted by a man who entered the cafe. It was Jack. He saw them through the glass door and froze for a moment. The scene before him was obvious. Alice and her leader seemed too close. Jack came to their table. His face was stony. "What is happening here?" Alice could not say anything because of surprise. Thomas, who is not used to conflicts, tried to take the situation under control. "You must be Jack." "We were just discussing work matters." "Work questions? In a cafe?" Jack looked around the table, on which there was a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Do you think I'm that stupid? Alice, feeling that now everything could go awry, tried to calm her husband. It really doesn't mean anything. Just lunch. But Jack wouldn't listen. He gave Thomas a scornful look and left without another word. Jack didn't come home that night. Alice tried to call him, but he didn't answer. The next morning, he entered the house with determination in his eyes. We need to talk, he said, closing the door behind him. Jack, I can explain. You don't need to explain, he interrupted. I have already seen everything. I just want to know if this was the first time or if you have been dating for a long time. Alice was cornered. She tried to defend herself, assuring her that nothing serious had happened, but Jack no longer believed her words. Do you think I don't see how you have changed? You became different. You were always close, but now you're somewhere far away, even when we are together. The quarrel between them became louder and louder. Their 7-year-old son, who had been sitting in his room earlier, heard the screams and ran into the living room. He stopped between his parents, his face a look of fear and confusion. Mom, Dad, please don't fight, he said, looking from one to the other. Dad, don't go. Jack looked at his son and his face softened. But the anger and pain he felt were too much. Son, I have to go for a while, he said, fighting back tears. But I will always be by your side, I promise. The boy began to cry, hugging his father's leg. Alice tried to approach, but Jack stopped her with a gesture. No, Alice. It was your actions that brought us to this. Jack lifted his son in his arms, kissed his forehead, and sat him back down on the couch. I'll be back soon, he told him before leaving the house. Alice was left standing there, watching the man she loved walk away and their son crying on the couch, asking why Mommy and Daddy couldn't be together anymore. Jack left. Alice stayed at home with her son. The boy was sitting on the sofa, hugging his teddy bear, his eyes red from tears. He didn't understand why Mommy and Daddy couldn't be together anymore, and every tear he shed pierced Alice's heart. She sat down next to him and hugged him, trying to calm him down. It's going to be okay, honey, she said, but there was no confidence in her voice. The boy turned to her, his small arms wrapped around her neck. Mom, will Dad come back? Does he not love us anymore? He asked with genuine childish pain in his voice. Alice felt her throat tighten. She tried to find the words to answer, but she didn't know what to say. Daddy loves you more than anything in the world, she whispered. He and I just... Sometimes adults make mistakes, and I made a big mistake. Her son hugged her tighter, and Alice felt tears welling up in her eyes again. She knew that she had destroyed not only her marriage, but also the childhood sense of security that her son had in the family. That night, Alice sat by the boy's side for a long time until he fell asleep in her arms. Her thoughts were filled with guilt and the realization that she needed to fight to at least partially fix what had happened. She carefully put her son on the bed, covered him with a blanket, and stood for a long time, watching him sleep. She promised herself that now she would do everything possible to be a better mother to him, even if she was no longer destined to bring Jack back. Alice realized that she could not fix her life until she broke all ties with Thomas. The next day, she met him in the office. Thomas looked confident as usual, but this time, Alice was determined. Thomas, I can't support our relationship any longer, she said bluntly. It was a mistake. By mistake? Asked Thomas, with a mixture of surprise and irritation. I thought there was something more between us. Maybe it was, but it's not right, replied Alice. I don't want to lose my family. Thomas tried to persuade her to change her mind, but Alice remained adamant. The conversation ended coldly, but she felt relieved. After Alice decided to end her relationship with Thomas, her work life began to change. Thomas, who used to be friendly and supportive of her, now behaved very differently. His tone became cold, and their every conversation was filled with hidden reproaches. At first, it was imperceptible. Remarks about her work sounded like constructive criticism. But gradually, the situation worsened. Thomas began to cling to any trifles. Reports that he used to praise now seemed unprofessional to him. He called completed projects unsatisfactory. Alice, you've made a mistake again with that report, he said one day, tossing the papers onto her desk. I don't understand how you were able to work here for so many years with such an approach. Alice tried to stay calm, even though she could feel her confidence crumbling under his pressure. I'll fix it, Thomas, she said each time, even though she knew it wouldn't help. Over time, his claims became more and more serious. He began to openly say that she was not doing her job and was letting the team down. Colleagues who had previously supported Alice now avoided her so as not to displease the manager. One day, Thomas called Alice into his office. His face was serious, and he was holding a piece of paper in his hands. Alice, I've put up with it for a long time, but I can no longer turn a blind eye to your incompetence. Your work is a detriment to the company, and I believe you should resign voluntarily before this becomes an official matter. Alice felt her heart skip a beat. She knew it wasn't because of her work, but because of their personal conflict. She realized that Thomas had decided to destroy her career in order to take revenge for her rejection. Thomas, it's not fair. I've been doing my job well all these years and you know it, she said, trying to keep her voice level. It's my decision, Alice, he replied, leaning back in his chair. I have already decided everything. Alice realized that it was useless to fight him. She didn't stand a chance in this situation because he was using his power to destroy her. With a heavy heart, she signed her resignation letter, feeling another part of her life crumble. After Alice lost her job, her life became even more difficult. Without a stable income, she was forced to save on everything. Her home became a quiet and sad place, and thoughts about the future did not give her peace. One day, Alice received an official letter. Jack had filed a lawsuit to get full custody of their son. He argued that Alice could not provide for the boy either financially or emotionally. It's not fair, she whispered, clutching the letter in her hands. She knew that she had made many mistakes, but she could not imagine her life without her son. Alice turned to a lawyer, but funds for his services were limited. She knew Jack had an advantage. He was financially stable, had a good reputation, and could offer her son a stable life. You will have to prove to the court that you can provide for your son, explained the lawyer. Do you have at least a temporary job? I'm looking, Alice answered, trying to hold on, but her voice was full of confusion. She knew time was working against her. Alice began actively sending resumes, ready to take any job to prove to the court that she can take care of her son. At the first meeting, Jack spoke confidently. His lawyer presented evidence that Alice does not have a stable income and cannot provide the boy with adequate living conditions. I just want my son to grow up in stability, Jack said, looking at the judge. Alice lost her job, and I don't want our son to suffer because of it. Alice tried to defend herself. I love my son. He is everything to me. Yes, I'm having a hard time right now, but I'm working to change that, she said with tears in her voice. The judge listened attentively to both sides, but his gaze remained impenetrable. After a few weeks, a decision was made. The court ruled that custody of the son goes to Jack, but Alice is allowed to see him twice a week. As the judge read the verdict, Alice felt her heart sink. Her world fell apart. She lost her son. Jack approached her after the meeting. I'm not doing this to hurt you, he said. I just want our son to have a better life. Alice didn't answer. She stood motionless as Jack took the boy with him. The days when Alice could see her son became a holiday for her. She spent all her efforts to make these short hours unforgettable. She took him to parks, bought him his favorite treats, told him stories, and promised that everything would be fine. But after each meeting, when the boy went with Jack, Alice was left alone with her pain. She knew that she had lost the most precious thing in her life because of her own mistakes. However, she did not give up. Alice continued to look for work, believing that she could get her son back and prove that she could be a good mother. After the court decision, which gave full custody of her son to Jack, Alice was left devastated. At first, she tried to deal with her pain using the only thing she had left, the right to see her son twice a week. These days became her lifeline, a reminder that she still had a chance to be a part of his life. But the reality was ruthless. Jack did a great job as a single father. His stable work and friendly nature created a comfortable and safe environment for the boy. Their life was filled with routine, family dinners, and joint walks. Alice's son was getting used to his new life more and more. He rarely mentioned his mother because her absence had become the norm for him. Jack, while not deliberately trying to keep the boy away from Alice, was also not helping to keep them connected. Alice was busy looking for a job. Without an income, she couldn't even support herself, let alone support her son. She sent out resumes every day, went to interviews, and tried to find at least a temporary job. Her phone was always close at hand, and every call made her hope that it was a potential employer. This constant busyness began to affect even the days when she could see her son. At first, she postponed meetings, explaining that she had important business. Then, these meetings became quite rare. The son was waiting for his mother, but she did not come. One day, when Alice canceled the meeting again, the boy asked Jack, "Dad, doesn't Mom love me anymore?" Jack sighed, sat down next to him, and stroked his head. "Mom loves you. She's just very busy right now," he replied, trying not to show how upset he was. But deep down, Jack understood. Alice was getting more and more distant from their son. Over time, Alice's son began to remember his mother less and less. He became attached to Jack, who was always there to support him. Life in their home was stable, and the boy had no reason to question why his mother no longer spent time with him. It became a real tragedy for Alice. She realized that she was losing her son not only legally, but also emotionally. Her absence, although due to her efforts to rebuild her life, became a barrier that she herself had built. Jack used to spend evenings in the yard with his son. They played football or just sat on the bench discussing the events of the day. One day, during another walk, Jack noticed a new woman appear near the playground with a boy who was about the same age as his son. The woman had a warm smile and her eyes radiated calmness. Her son was running around the playground while she watched him from the bench. Jack decided to say hello. "Good evening," he said, coming closer. "Are you new to our area?" "Yes, I moved here recently," she answered, smiling. "I'm Mary, and this is my son, Sam." Jack introduced himself and then called his son over to introduce him to Sam. The boys quickly found a common language and ran to play together. "They seem to get along well," Mary remarked, looking at the children. "Yes, they quickly found a common language," answered Jack. "And your husband? Is he busy today?" Mary lowered her eyes slightly, and her smile disappeared for a moment. "He is not with us. He died in a car accident when I was pregnant." Jack felt compassion well up in him. "I'm very sorry," he said sincerely. "It's been hard, but I'm thankful I have Sam. He gives me strength to move on." This first conversation was the beginning of their acquaintance. Over time, Jack and Mary began to spend more time together. The boys were playing in the yard, and they were sitting next to each other and talking. Jack noticed how calm and comfortable he felt next to Mary. Her warm nature and ability to find joy in small things began to captivate him. Mary also noticed how caring Jack was for his son. She was impressed by how he knew how to listen and support the boy, and she saw in him a strong man who was ready to do anything for the sake of his family. One day, when the children were playing in the sandbox, Mary turned to Jack. "You know, you are a wonderful father. Sam often says he wishes he had a dad like you." Jack laughed, but there were warm sparks in his eyes. "And you are a wonderful mother. Sam is lucky to have you." Every day, their communication became closer. One evening, when the children had already run home, Jack and Mary remained in the yard. "Looks like our boys have become real friends," Mary said, as she watched the children hide in the entryway. "Yes, and that's good. They help each other." "I think they need it, and we need it," answered Jack. Mary looked at him slightly confused, but there was something warm and gentle in her eyes. "To us?" she asked. Jack smiled, choosing his words. "I think it is difficult for both. I see you holding on for Sam, and I think you deserve happiness." Mary stared at him for a moment. Her heart pounded, but she only answered, "I haven't heard such words for a long time." Their meetings became regular. Jack and Mary gradually began to spend more time together, not only because of the children, but also because they liked to talk to each other. They shared their difficulties, discussed the past, and built hopes for the future. One day, while escorting Mary to her apartment, Jack unexpectedly took her hand. "You helped me feel like I could be happy again," he said. Mary did not answer, but her eyes shone. This moment was the beginning of something new for them, mutual support and love, which was beginning to blossom. One evening, Mary invited Jack and his son to her home for dinner. It was a simple but warm evening, the children playing in their room and Jack and Mary sitting in the kitchen with a glass of wine. "You're a great cook," Jack said after tasting her casserole. "It's one of the few things I really like to do," Mary replied, smiling a little awkwardly. They talked for a long time about their lives. Jack talked about his struggles with Alice, how hard it was to support the family, and how he eventually realized he could no longer continue this marriage. Mary shared her story. how difficult it was to lose her husband even before the birth of her son, and how loneliness forced her to focus only on the child, leaving no room for her own happiness. "But now that you're around, it seems like there's a light in my life again," Mary said softly, looking at him. Jack gently took her hand, looking into her eyes. "You also helped me believe in myself again," he answered. Their relationship gradually deepened. One evening, when the children fell asleep after another game together, Jack and Mary were left alone in the living room. The conversation died down, and the words were replaced by a warm silence. Jack leaned closer to Mary and their eyes met. In that moment, everything seemed right. He slowly raised his hand and lightly touched her cheek. "Mary, you made me stronger." "I want you to know that," he whispered. Mary responded with a slight nod, and their lips touched. It was a gentle, timid kiss, but there was so much sincerity and feeling in it that it seemed to both of them. Their past began to recede. After their first kiss, Jack and Mary became closer. They began to spend evenings together, not only because of the children, but also because they were good with each other. Together, they planned walks, trips to the park, or to performances for children. Their sons became inseparable, and this brought their parents even closer. Sam started calling Jack his friend, and Jack's son often said that Mary reminded him of his mother. Once, during a joint walk, Jack admitted, "Mary, I didn't think I could trust anyone again after everything that happened. But you showed me that life can be simpler and brighter." Mary stopped and looked at him with warmth in her eyes. "I also thought that my life would forever remain only for Sam. But you and your son have become part of our family." Their relationship developed, but there were also difficulties. Jack still felt guilty about Alice. He doubted whether it was right to start a new life while his son's mother was in such a difficult situation. One day, when Jack and Mary were walking in the park, she asked, "Are you still thinking about Alice?" Jack sighed. "I cannot completely erase it. She is the mother of my son. But I know I can't bring back the past. And you help me move on." Mary squeezed his hand gently. "I understand. But if you ever feel like giving her a second chance, let me know. I don't want to be part of the lie." This conversation further strengthened their relationship. They realized that they could overcome difficulties together if they were honest with each other. Jack and Mary gradually became more like a real family. Their children played together like brothers, and they built their relationship on trust and support. One evening, while they were having dinner together, Sam asked, "Dad, Jack, will you be my real dad?" The question caught Jack by surprise, but he smiled and replied, "I'll always be there, Sam." Mary looked at them with warmth in her heart. She felt that she had finally found happiness again. Alice watched the changes in Jack's life from the side. She realized that Jack and Mary were happy together, and even though it hurt, she accepted it. Her meetings with her son became rare, but she realized that she had to find her own way to happiness. Once, during a meeting with her son, she told him, "Honey, I will always be by your side, even if we don't live together. You are my greatest joy." The boy hugged her and answered, "I know, Mother." These words gave Alice peace. She decided not to dwell on the past anymore, but to focus on her future. One evening, during the family dinner, Jack took out a small velvet box and knelt before Mary. "Mary, you not only made me happy, but also gave me hope. You and Sam have become a part of our lives, and I want us to officially become a family. Will you marry me?" Mary was amazed. Tears appeared in her eyes, but they were tears of happiness. She nodded and whispered, "Yes." The children happily jumped around in celebration of the moment, and in that moment, Jack and Mary knew that their new life had officially begun. The wedding was modest but filled with love. Only the closest friends and relatives attended the ceremony. The children rejoiced more than anyone, because now their parents were officially together. After the wedding, they began a new chapter of their lives as a united family. They overcame difficulties together, supported each other, and enjoyed every day. Jack and Mary learned that life can be unpredictable, but even after losses and disappointments, there is always a chance to find happiness and love. Jack, Mary, and their children became an example of how even after difficult trials you can build a new, happy life. They learned to appreciate what they have, and together they created a strong and loving family. Each of them found their place in this new world, and their story proved that even after the darkest night, there is always a dawn. As Jack and Mary start a new life together, Alice feels like she's hit rock bottom. Her life was in ruins, and each day brought new waves of loneliness and despair. She realized that she couldn't handle it on her own anymore. One day, waking up in her small apartment with a heavy feeling of emptiness, she decided to ask for help. Alice made an appointment with a therapist, knowing that this might be her only chance to find a path to healing. Her life seemed shattered into pieces, and she didn't know how to put them back together. The psychotherapist helped her understand that the past cannot be changed, but can be used as a lesson. Alice began to work on herself, develop confidence, and learn to live on. Therapy gave her the strength to return to life. She enrolled in advanced training courses and later found a stable job that allowed her to regain financial independence. Although meetings with her son were rare and brief, she tried to make them special in order to maintain an emotional connection with him. Once, when her son asked her if she was happy, Alice replied, "I'm trying to become better. And every time I see you, I feel like I'm making the right move." These words became an incentive for her to move on. Over time, Alice accepted a new reality, realizing that happiness depends not only on circumstances, but also on her own choices. Although her life was not the same, she felt that she was able to live and be happy again, using her mistakes as an impetus for change.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give it a like. Please share your thoughts in the comment section and see you in the next one. Goodbye for now. See you soon.